of the Duchy of Lancaster, which for those of you who are not in the UK is one of our quaint titles for cabinet ministers, but basically means he is Keir Starmer's right-hand man in Downing Street, looking at this very specific issue of how we deliver across government effectively. We have David Gauke, who held many ministerial roles in the last government and finished as Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. Both Darren and David were Chief Secretary for the Treasury at different points. I don't know what the collective noun is for Chief Secretaries to the Treasury, maybe a shakedown of Chief Secretaries. Collective noun is for Chief Secretaries to the Treasury, maybe a shakedown of Chief Secretaries. And David is a very precious thing in politics at the moment, someone who is actually on the centre-right and has not drifted to the radical right or far right, and is a very key ally, I think, for the centre-left in that respect. And then we have Caroline Ciccone, who is head of an organisation called Accountable.us, which looks to investigate and communicate about corruption amongst state officials and corporate organisations in America. So she's got nothing on at the moment. No challenges there. But she previously worked in the Biden administration and in the Obama administration on a variety of different roles, including on the Affordable Care Act and healthcare, and communicating that to the public. So I'm going to start with Darren, if I can come to you first. You've got this new job, you've only been in it a couple of weeks, looking at delivery across government. What are the big things you want to tackle in terms of fixing our state machinery so that can happen? And how do you help and convince your colleagues to focus on that when there's so much day-to-day noise and firefighting that needs to be done?
Well, Sam, thanks for the introduction, and great to be here this afternoon. I think to dive straight into the wonkiness, we've got to fix the front end and we've got to fix the back end. The front end, I mean the way in which the public engage with the government and the public services that we run. You will all know that each department has its own hotline on the telephone, its own paperwork, its own application process. The departments don't talk to each other. If you have a family where you might receive some universal credit or housing support, a child with additional needs, if you're trying to get the childcare, tax-free credits, and all of these types of things, you can spend hours and hours on the telephone, logging into different websites, not being quite sure what you're entitled to, not knowing the status of your application. It's deeply frustrating. This would never happen in the private sector because you just lose all of your customers. We have to make the front end, the experience that people have of engaging with the state, much, much more effective. That also enables us to help people more effectively, to show that when we make policy decisions in Westminster, we're delivering tangible, real change in the lives of people in the real world. But to do that, you've got to fix the back end as well, because the reason the system is rubbish is because all of the IT is rubbish. We've got lots of legacy IT systems, IT that doesn't talk to each other. I'm told we have over 200 HR systems across government, for example. The finance systems are not integrated. And of course, you have millions of different logins for different services. So we're going to be fixing the back end as well in terms of ID, which you've heard from the Prime Minister today, as well as digital transformation of public services, so we can deliver that better outcome for people. And attached to that is then the government actually knowing when an outcome has been achieved in the real world. Because too often in Westminster, we'll sit around the table and talk about policy from our papers. And I often have to ask, how do we know that we've actually changed someone's life? And where are they? And that's an important thing to track from a policy perspective. But in the context of the fight with the populist right, it's also an important thing to get right for our politics and our communications, because we need to find those people in those communities, capture the change that we're delivering in terms of content and storytelling, and then be able to show people the difference that we're making. So that's broadly the task that I've been given to support the Prime Minister and the rest of the Cabinet in my new delivery role.
And how do you make the argument for radical change to parts of the state, whether it's the civil service or big investments in IT, without feeding into the idea that Britain is completely broken, which then in turn feeds the rise of populism and extremism, because it leads into their argument that we're better off sort of burning everything down and starting again rather than trying to fix what we have.
This is the big distinction, I think, between what does radicalisation, sorry, not radicalisation, that's the wrong phrase. What does radical transformation mean for government? On the one hand, you've got the populist right who do want to tear everything down. They don't want the institutions that we have. I don't really understand why Reform hate Britain so much. They hate the BBC, they hate the NHS, they hate government. I don't quite know what they think they're going to do to actually deliver for people in our country. And then we've got the radical transformation that we progressives have, which is about modernising the state and doing so in a quick and transformative way to be able to meet the needs of the public who, let's be honest, are paying for those public services to be delivered in the first place. So for us, we just need a really clear direction on that from the Prime Minister downwards. And my job is to make sure that the system is enacting that direction, that we are delivering that change. And you don't compromise on that. There'll be parts of the civil service, parts of Whitehall that will be reluctant to change, but I'm afraid that's not up for debate. We're very clear what we need to do and we will be driving it through. And I think that is a great opportunity for civil servants that want to step in that space and make history by modernising the state.
David, can I bring you in? You've obviously done a lot of delivery roles in government over a long time. What's your advice for Darren on what needs to be fixed and how best to go about it in terms of managing time and working with ministers?
Well, I certainly... Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here as an emissary from Planet Centre-Right and to be surrounded by all you progressives. And look, I wish Darren the best of luck in terms of what he's trying to do. I think it is in the interest of all of us that we can deliver a state that is working effectively, and it is vital work. And public expectations are always rising, and very often the public sector has struggled to respond to those rising expectations, and these improvements are necessary. It might not be sufficient, in fact it won't be sufficient to turn everything around, but it's certainly necessary. I think one of the biggest challenges that any minister faces is one of time, and that applies in many respects. Time because you're kind of immensely busy. And there is a real need to prioritise, to work out what you are trying to do and to be disciplined enough to focus on what you are trying to do rather than just dealing with the day-to-day. Your phrase, firefighting, Sam, is a really important one. It's very easy to just be completely absorbed by what you have to do and that you don't create the time that what you need to do. And then there is the fact that a lot of these reforms do not happen very quickly. They certainly take more time than the attention span of the media, perhaps quite a lot of the electorate. There are things that you need to do that you will not see the benefit of for 2 or 3 years, sometimes much longer than that, but it still needs doing. And being able to focus on the important rather than just the urgent is an immense challenge here. And you do need that ministerial input is vital because, I'm not a critic of civil servants. I think there's some, the civil servants do terrific work, but the machine needs to be driven. You cannot just assume that it'll operate and you can leave it to it and you make a decision and you've made your note on your submission and then everyone will go and implement it. You have to keep, and I know Darren knows this, you have to keep coming back again and again, checking on the implementation. What are the barriers? That is the sort of boring, unglamorous work of a minister that really makes the difference. And so, as I say, Darren doesn't need to hear this from me, but that advice in terms of the sort of unglamorous, important part of government really matters. It requires persistence, resilience, and discipline. And if you don't do that, and we have had governments that have been led by people who have not been good at that, nothing properly works, nothing happens. So it's unrelenting, but ultimately you can deliver.
It's quite strange that we don't have any proper training for ministers and how to do any of this stuff, given that what you've said is so often the kind of thing that people say when they finish their time in government, that we don't help people do it, learn how to do it quicker in government. Is there a role for something like that? Is there a role for actually doing proper training for ministers when they're first in a job?
Yeah, I think there is. Look, Sam, you're involved in the Institute for Government, and they do a lot of good work here. I mean, look, some of what I'm saying is really common sense. It's out there. For if you are an aspiring minister, you know, all this information, all these ideas, they should be there if you've got an inquiring mind. There are enough books out there. There are enough people who will sort of talk to you about these things. But yeah, I mean, I think maybe the challenge is that our politics isn't delivering enough people, perhaps, who are kind of, or rewarding the right people who are kind of good at that delivery stuff of being the effective minister, that there is a sort of systemic problem that, you know, sometimes the system rewards those who are kind of good at sound bites and political, you know, internal positioning, rather than a focus on delivery. And perhaps there's more we could do on that front as well.
You're being very polite by not naming any names in these other ministers who you might be referring to.
I think people might be able to guess.
One final question. Where do you think the difference is between the centre-right and centre-left on this at the moment, in terms of thinking about what the role of the state actually is in delivering public services? Because it sounds like there's a lot of similarity between where this government is and where people like you within the last government are. Is there still a distinction there that's important to focus on?
Look, I think there is a distinction. Look, there are lots of areas where there's an overlap, and I think our politics would be better if we were prepared to recognise where there are areas of overlap. And look, I've just been involved in a sentencing review for the current government. And come forward with a sort of set of recommendations that I think frankly, lots of traditional Conservatives could support, particularly those who have been really engaged with these issues. So yes, there is overlap. There are differences. I think, as someone on the centre-right, I'm probably less utopian, and perhaps I'm a bit more suspicious of what the state can do in some areas. I'm probably more inclined to, when it comes to the economy, to favour market-based solutions. But this is on a spectrum. There's not a kind of the straightforward, clear divide. And I would argue that the centre ground is made up of people who believe in a world of trade-offs, of recognising complexity, of trying to solve problems, not trying to exploit it. I think the instincts of the centre-right versus the centre-left is perhaps more cautious. Perhaps less utopian, and less optimistic about the good that the state can do. But these are slightly finer distinctions than sometimes our current political debate can accommodate. And look, if you're from the centre-right and you've got a centre-left government, I still think you want that government to succeed in its objectives because you want the country to succeed. And I think a bit more of that coming from the centre-right would be welcome.
Caroline, can I bring you in now? You worked in the Biden administration on healthcare. What messaging, what communication strategies did you find most effective in winning people over to the idea of reform that they might have been scared by or concerned by?
Well, I like to say that the best communication strategy is the truth. And I think when you use that as your North Star, it can be quite easy. Tell people the truth, and if you feel really good about the policies that you're putting in place and that you're implementing, the path is sort of in front of you. Now, the hard part is, what are you actually selling? So I think the devil is in the details, and the policy needs to work. And so using the example of healthcare, as we recall from the Obama administration, the Affordable Care Act, which is, you know, a marquee piece of reform that we are still touting and is still, you know, the right is trying to tear down as we speak, but has been transformative for so many people. The initial rollout, the website didn't work. And that was a huge inflection point that we obviously recovered from, but in terms of the IT has to work, people have these incredibly powerful phones, and they're used to interfacing with other entities very easily, so the government needs to meet that bare minimum. We also need to make sure that when policies are being implemented, they're being implemented quickly. We have deadlines for implementation that can go years out, and that is just not the pace that people are feeling right now in terms of what sort of reforms they feel like they need in their lives. And so I think when you're in government and when you're in these positions where you're trying to solve big problems for people, you need to make sure that there are marquee moments along the way where you can talk about the impact, the positive impacts on people, telling people's real stories like you were mentioning, where they can talk about their own experience. Their words are more effective than anything any government official can say. And we have to make sure that those moments are happening and that we don't have a policy that is designed so that it is years and years in the future with no impact. And then I think the last point, I've been thinking a lot about calling ourselves progressives, and what does that mean? And inherent in that is progress. You're building on progress. But I think the trap there is people are looking for really big, bold reforms. They want change. They are dissatisfied with their lives. I think that's the theme that we've been hearing today. And the risk is when you are trying to get a good policy in place to solve some sort of problem. So for instance, with healthcare, which, the American healthcare system still has so many challenges, is so broken in so many ways, prices continue to be out of control, and we need to make sure that we are meeting the moment with the scale of reform that people demand. And so at the end of the day, we need to make sure we're selling something big. And I think that because progressives are, we are technical, we can be technical at times, and we want to be smart, and we need to make sure that policies don't get so watered down that we don't have anything big to sell to people. And I think that's just something that continues to be a challenge. I think that being able to tell a full story is really, really critical, and letting people speak for themselves and going out into communities and not keeping that selling of the policy within the confines of, DC and elite media.
On that question of sort of pace and the desire for change and the urgency for change, in your current organisations working on corruption, how do you deal with the sort of increasing sense from the public that they're willing to make trade-offs around democracy and around allowing people into power who might not be worried so much about all the niceties of the processes that have existed in the past and the norms that have existed in the past, because they just want something to happen, and it's kind of worth a bit, not necessarily of corruption, but of autocracy to make that happen?
Well, I definitely think it's a challenge to make sure that people are not willing to pay the corruption price for something else that they get in return. And I think what we try to do is make sure that people understand, it's a key element of an autocratic government is to try to undermine the government itself and make it seem like the system is broken and it's not functioning. Well, what you're seeing right now, what we're spending a lot of time talking about, is that the system is doing things. It's just not for you. It's for them. It's for a small group of people. It's for a small group of well-connected people. It's for a small group of very wealthy individuals and corporations that have tremendous influence in government. So in fact, they are busy. The system is doing things. It's just, you are not benefiting from their activity. And that is what the story that we are trying to tell.
Darren, can I come back to you on this question of pace versus the scale of the change that's required? Over the next couple of years, while you're in this job, how do you balance that sort of urgency to show that you're doing something in government and to have proof points of success, whether it's around NHS or crime or whatever, versus the fact that a lot of the processes that would really deeply fix our problems, whether that's civil service reform or building new IT systems, just take a long time and take resource away from meeting the urgent priorities?
Yeah, I think it's the challenge, right? But I think pace has to be alongside prioritization, and you can't go at pace at everything because you're just not going to make any progress. So I think on the transformation side, you need to decide what you're doing at speed in what order, which is why fundamental parts of the transformation, whether it's digital ID or legacy IT systems, is something you need to get right first in order to then make progress on other things afterwards. And then in terms of broader policy, take infrastructure spending, for example. The government's increased the amount of public investment as part of our economic policy, and that's great, but we do need to be able to show that in the medium term we're fixing potholes, the Pride in Place money is doing up your high street, you've seen the difference in your local community, whilst also knowing that your kids might have got an apprenticeship because we did the deal with Norway on frigates in the Clyde, and so you can see the benefit of long-term economic infrastructure. But you have to take a very clear view about pace and prioritisation, as opposed to just doing a lot of great work that doesn't deliver for another 10 years, because you won't get thanked for that if you've not made any progress by the time of the next election.
And just finally, if you could look at yourself in 2 years looking back, or 4 years looking back, what's the one thing you really would have wanted to achieve in this role in terms of changing the state?
I think for me, if we get this digital ID system working and the public being with us, that will be the bedrock of the modern state and will allow for really quite exciting public service reform in the future. And the Technology Secretary will be delivering that alongside other colleagues providing services, but I'll be coordinating it from the Cabinet Office. So if we've been able to make that programme a success, I'll be very happy.
I'm already being red counted on the screen up there. So we are going to have to finish a very short session, but hopefully a useful one for all of you. So huge thanks to David, Darren and Caroline for the panel. Thank you very much.